One of the fastest growing segments of the watch industries and one of my personal favorites is independent watchmaking. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the rise of independent watchmaking in terms of popularity, pricing, where I think they're going wrong, and where they can improve. So let's get right into it. The genre of independent watchmaking has made tremendous strides, I would say over the last decade especially, as of course the watch industry has benefited from social media, making these watchmakers' incredible talent more visible to the world. With that, it has allowed people to discover new brands and new talent that they would have otherwise never known about, and ultimately discover watches that are unique, special, and of course quirky in some way, be it mechanically or in terms of their design. Now, of course, not all watches are made equal, and I would say that a lot of these new independent watchmakers are falling into some major pitfalls that I think will lead to actually something pretty disastrous with the independent watch segment, but I'll get to that later in the video. But first, I kind of want to contextualize this whole video with what is an independent watchmaker, right? Something that's actually very, very difficult to define, and that I really haven't found a cohesive definition overall from pretty much anybody in the entire watch industry. And the reason being is that how do you distinguish, for example, an independent watchmaker, so to speak, from maybe a micro brand, right? These are all things to take into consideration. And so ultimately, I wanted to kind of provide a cohesive definition of what I believe to be an independent watchmaker, and that starts first and foremost with production. To me, production has to be sub 1,000 units. Simply put, a watchmaker cannot make more than 1,000 watches and now be considered an independent watchmaker. At that point, in my opinion, they have a viable product which they can sell to the masses. 1,000 not being that big of a number, but for the watch industry, I think is a pretty considerable amount. And so really production is the first main constraint I would place on what you can define as an independent watchmaker and what you can't define as an independent watchmaker. Second, of course, has to do with the amount of handwork done to the watch itself. Now, of course, this is extremely subjective, right? In this case, we're talking about things like in-house movement. Of course, the incredible finishing, if there's any hand finishing or if everything is done by a machine. If, of course, the case is made in-house, the dial is made in-house, the hands are finished in-house. How much of the watch actually is finished by a watchmaker, right? It kind of goes back to this fantasy of a watchmaker sitting at his bench, kind of slaving away 10 hours a day, every single day for his entire life, creating, his vision for perfection. To me, it has to have a lot of handwork done. It doesn't necessarily have to have an in-house movement. Take, for example, a watchmaker by the name of Habring, who I consider to be an independent watchmaker. Now, this is, for example, a watchmaker who makes chronographs that are based on the Valjoux 7750, but that he highly modifies to the point where it's basically unrecognizable from the original base movement. Now, to me, he still classifies as an independent watchmaker because he makes enough components in-house and puts enough thought into all of his movements. So essentially, he's making too few watches and putting enough handwork and thought into his watches to classify him as an independent watchmaker. No question about it, this is really the most muddy part of the definition of an independent watchmaker, and it's going to vary from person to person, right? Again, I don't necessarily value in-house movements as much as maybe some other collectors value them, because at the end of the day, the standard, if you go back 20 years, which, in the context of the watch industry is really not that long of a period, in-house movements were not a thing at all, even if you go back 10 or 15 years. To me, this is kind of a new standard that I still am not adopting as part of my definition for an independent watchmaker, but for me, it has to have some feature or component of either hand finishing or kind of ingenuity, where something is changed to where it's different enough, where it's not just a unique dial or kind of a special dial created by the watch brand or the watchmaker itself. It really has something or another that makes it unique and special in a mechanical way. Now, of course, finishing is not the only determinant for an independent watchmaker. He can also focus on high-end complications, things like chronographs, perpetual calendars, or calendar complications in general, things like minute repeaters or tourbillons. All of these kind of different complications will show the technical prowess of a watchmaker and ultimately establish them as, of course, an independent watchmaker in my mind. So really there's two parts to my definition. One is the amount produced, right? It has to be, again, sub 1,000 units. And two, it comes down to how much actual thought and work is put into the watch itself. Now, this is not strictly based on design, but really in terms of the movement, how much it's re-engineered, how much it's finished by hand. All those kind of things to me really play into whether a watch brand can be considered as an independent watchmaker or as, of course, a micro brand. But again, this is a very, very kind of broad definition, and it really will vary from person to person. But again, it's really hard to distinguish what is and isn't an independent watchmaker, especially in kind of the landscape of the watch market today. That's just what I go by. It might be wrong, it might be incorrect to those in the comments. So let me know what your definition of an independent watchmaker is. I would love to get your feedback and create some form of a cohesive definition. So as I mentioned, I was a big fan of independent watchmaking and still am a huge fan of independent watchmaking for a number of reasons. First and foremost is the incredible ingenuity. As I've mentioned in previous videos, the watchmaking industry is not a new industry, right? This is something, if you go back to clocks and clock towers, even sundials, is thousands of years old, right? And so it's very hard to find true innovation in the watch industry. And there's very few watch brands that are currently doing that. And to me, the brands, or at least the genre of watchmaking that is pushing the boundaries of what can be done in a wristwatch form is really independent watchmaking. And that's what made me fall in love with it 5 to 10 years ago. I think naturally, as most watch collectors get into watches, right, there's only so much about Rolex and Omega and Panerai and IWC and all these amazing brands that you can kind of learn about. And then eventually you kind of want to broaden your horizons, or at least that was my experience, and learn about some kind of niche watchmakers, or true artisans as I call them, right? They're true artists creating, as I say all the time, their visions for perfection. And that's what really appealed to me. But also over and above that was the incredible price points, right? Most of these brands sold for a fraction of what the big name retailers sold for, like Patek Philippe, like A. Lange & Söhne, like Audemars Piguet. The innovation was super, super high. And now we're faced with a kind of market of independent watchmaking where the ingenuity is still very, very high, no question about it. But really the entire basis of what made me love independent watchmaking, which was incredible deals or at least great value for the amount of innovation you're getting, is totally gone. I mean, like I can't stress this enough. There's so many watch brands now that I think are just frankly overcharging their customers. And the brand that in particular that stands out to me is Laurent Ferrier. And I hate to say this as a former Laurent Ferrier owner. I mean, I used to own a Gallet Square with the ice blue dial, which was an absolutely beautiful watch, natural escapement with a micro rotor, so many different interior angles. And as of this year, they released a new watch that to me was a huge disappointment. They smoothed out a bridge on the actual movement itself to remove 3 interior angles in the movement, which of course, for those who follow kind of high-end finishing, no, that's probably one of the most difficult kind of techniques to master as a watch brand. And then not to mention the fact that they got rid of the natural escapement, which I think was their main calling card because so few brands actually use that escapement. Off the top of my head, there's less than 5 in the world that actually use this escapement. And so it was something that I think was very prodigious for Laurent Ferrier to do, especially in scale, obviously them being kind of a small time manufacturer, but doing it for pretty much all of their movements, or at least all of their automatic movements. So for them to get rid of it and now have a retail price for a basic stainless steel watch with a smoothed out bridge for $60,000. I look at that and just ask myself, where is the value? Heck, I mean, you can critique the new Patek Philippe reference 6196P for, of course, its very high price point at retail, considering it is, of course, $49,000, but it's still a far cry away from $60,000, and at least it's in platinum as opposed to being in stainless steel. And in the case of the Laurent Ferrier, it doesn't have over 180 years of history like Patek Philippe does that they've built time and time again, showing off their incredible kudos to the watch industry. So to me, I think the lack of ingenuity really, and Laurent Ferrier is just kind of the tipping point. There's so many brands coming out with these crazy complications, starting their price point out at $200,000. Sure, while a lot of these brands are selling out and there's great success with a lot of these independent watchmakers, and I love to see that, I think that they're creating a market that is simply unsustainable and that will be very, very disastrous in the future. I mean, think about it. There's only so many brands that you can create and pop out of the blue, and so many customers who will pay $200,000 or $100,000 plus for a niche independent watchmaker. And even though it's selling out now, that doesn't guarantee future success. I mean, you bring that watch to me as a secondary market dealer, what would I ultimately pay for that watch? I'm the customer, right, to a certain extent, as opposed to maybe the odd retail customer. To me, I'm paying cents on the dollar for this wristwatch, and it's something that I think a lot of people should be definitely aware of when they're buying these kind of niche watchmakers at these very high inflated retail prices, because at the end of the day, these prices won't hold forever. And to me, it's the biggest shame when it comes to independent watchmaking, because it just takes away from collectors like myself who want to enter into the space and buy incredible watches, but simply can't because the price point really is egregious now at this point, and I think unwarranted for what they're able to achieve in a lot of cases. Now, that's not to say that independent watchmaking isn't worth looking into and isn't worth collecting. I still absolutely love independent watch brands, but I definitely think that they need to step their game up when it comes to the price-quality ratio. I think the quality is extremely high, and there's no question about that. But at the end of the day, the price point just doesn't make sense for what it is or what it's supposed supposed to be. Independent watchmaking for me is underpinned by two things: incredible ingenuity and incredible price points. And when you take either one of those things out of the equation, to me, you're left with something that just isn't great in terms of the independent watchmaking landscape, and I think will definitely have an impact in the future for this market. Guys, this is my rant for independent watches. Let me know what you think down in the comments below of my definition for independent watchmaking, and of course, let me know your thoughts about the independent watch market. Where do you see it going over the next couple of years? I definitely think it will continue to be strong with high demand from brands like, for example, FP Journe and MB&F and the main kind of players that have established themselves, but I'm not so sure that we'll see the same success that we've been seeing for a lot of the new brands popping up and that are charging crazy high retail prices. But that's just my opinion. What do I know? I'd love to get your feedback down in the comments, and of course, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like the video, subscribe for more videos like this in the future. As always, my name is Marco from Berdeen's Jewelry. I'll see you all in the next one.